Hi, I'm Larry Castle here with Ken Brown for That's a Good Question, episode 28. How do we minister in a polarized culture?
Well, hey, welcome back, my friend. Perhaps take a minute to tell our viewers how you're doing after you and the entire family came down with COVID. We missed having you in person in church this past Sunday. And then last week, because you were ill, I ended up doing a solo episode of this. That's a good question. We don't want to have to do that again. So glad to have you back. How are you guys coming along?
Doing well, and I want to add you did a great job last week, and we all know now that I'm unnecessary, and it's just for fun that we throw me in
No.
here, comic relief. Um, we're all doing very well. We have a couple of lingering, symptoms. A couple of us are coughing, and we're not able to fully taste food yet, stuff like that. But
Mm.
we're all past the 10-day mark now, so the doctors tell us we're not needing to quarantine anymore, and we're all, it seems like, on the mend. So everybody's feeling tons better. So thanks.
Good deal. Yep.
So we were talking about today's topic being how do we minister in a polarized culture? We've
Mm.
got a variety of topics from what we were just talking about, something as seemingly
Mm.
mundane as an illness, to
Mhm.
all of the things going on with politics right now. And in
Mm.
this episode, we want to talk about, how do these divisions develop, and how do we engage and minister to our people in spite of these things that could potentially cause separation among
Mm.
us?
Just to highlight what you said, something as mundane as a virus, and yet there is division about that. I saw a political cartoon this week, and it showed what it called the Polarized Express, coronavirus edition. Yeah. So, when you've got those kind of political cartoons going, you know that we're in a divided time.
Yeah, there are all kinds of things that could cause this, and yet at the same time, that's one of the things that's supposed to be unique about us as the church, right? You've got
Mm.
people coming
Mm.
from a variety of backgrounds and perspectives,
Mm.
and yet we have, or we're supposed to have, this supernatural unity because of what we have in common in
Mm.
Christ. So we've got all kinds of things that we could be divided over. There are matters that have to do with race. There are matters
Mhm.
that have to do with politics. Then you've got matters that have to do with religion itself. As we take a look at
Mhm.
what God says in His Word and try to
Mhm.
understand how it applies, we can have differences there, cultural differences um, throughout our whole society.
Yeah.
You know, all
And
of
it's
these
been going on for a long time. I'd like to take a bit and just talk about that a bit. That the fact that we're very divided right now, and there's no doubt that it's a heightened polarization that we have. But there's been a fraying consensus, a fraying of the consensus among our society for several decades. There, for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is that when you think about it, there are fewer galvanizing national events
Hmm.
that we have now. I think things where everybody participates at the same time, and we all have a sense of community about that, at least on a nationwide basis. I mean, I think about things like the Olympics. The Olympics are still a huge deal, and I enjoy them very much, and I'm glad. But there was a time when everybody was fixed on the Olympics. I mean, everybody at the same time, and it was every 4 years back then. It wasn't 2 years. You had 1 year you had the Winter Olympics, and then 2 years later you had the summer, and 2 years. It was every 4 years you had both
It
in
was a
that
bigger
in that
deal when you
same.
had to wait that 4 years, right?
This is true too. That's a good point. Yeah. But the Olympics back in '68, in the Olympics in Mexico City, a couple of our athletes decided to make a political statement when they were standing on the podium, and they put their arms up with a black glove on for black power. and the Black Power movement. So that kind of politicized things a bit. But that was one thing. Nevertheless, they were still very popular, still are, but just a bit less, not quite as galvanizing as they used to be. Things like the Academy Awards, the Oscars, that used to be such a huge thing, but it's been spoiled in some ways because one, Hollywood is not exactly what Hollywood used to be, and the major motion picture production companies, don't have a monopoly like they used to. But also that became politicized as well. Over time, over the last several decades, you get people who get up and they don't just humbly give thanks for the reward, thank the people who helped them get that award, but rather often say something political while they're there. That turns, some people off. There was a time where everybody was watching the same news. Pretty much. You had 3 broadcast networks, and each of them at the same time in the evening had a broadcast of the evening news, and you chose which anchor you liked best. By far the most popular for a few decades was Walter Cronkite. So you were getting your news. We were all hearing the same news. You didn't have the internet. You didn't have bunches of cable, 24/7 cable with a lot of different voices giving you news. TV shows were only on those 3 networks. So not only was it just the news that you were getting in a limited variety, but the TV shows you watched only came from those 3 networks. So a high percentage of people that you would associate with saw those same shows. And maybe you go to school the next day, you go to work the next day, and you're talking about, hey, did you see? And many people saw that. That happens less and less now because everybody's got their own stuff that they watch. So the chances that you go to school or work the next day, say, did you see last night at the same time? You can see how that's galvanizing. At the same time, people are gathered around the same thing. And then for the next day or days, they're able to talk about it. Maybe you remember some of those shows. You were pretty young in the 70s, but do you remember Happy Days?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was probably watching him in syndication, but yeah, I remember watching that pretty regularly.
Well, I remember that, and it was wildly popular in the 70s, and it was recalling better days, at least for many people, better days than we were having in the 70s, the decade you were born. I was born the decade before that. And it's recalling, the people who came up with the idea, it was genius because they undoubtedly sensed that there was this fraying going on. And there was some deterioration going on in the society from what it had been in the 50s, which is the setting for Happy Days. But just 20 years later, just a couple decades later, one generation, now you're talking about looking back. And those were the happy days. Those were the days. So that raises some questions, doesn't it? What happened? What happened in just 20 years? From, say, the late 50s to the late 70s that made those happy days something that seemed like it was really distant, but it was really only 20 years or so. And as I've thought about that, there's a bunch of things. Feel free to, if any of that needs elaboration or I'm just going on too much, don't hesitate to
I was
cut me off.
and I think you might be headed to some of this. Part of that is the appearance of happier days from our perspective, so, those days were great would have been great for me. I'm thinking of 70s and early 80s is when my recollection begins. And those days might have seemed better to some of my counterparts because there wasn't as much of marginalization happening to them. So my African-American friend in elementary school, we're going to the same school. He has access to the same school that I have access to then in the 80s, but that wouldn't have been the case in those happier days. So happier from my perspective, not from his.
Perfect point. Absolutely right. That, I alluded to that a little bit when I said they were happy days for many, in the 50s, but it wasn't happy necessarily for everybody. And here's the other thing. What you just said about, hey, my African-American friend who's now in my class has access to the same school that I may not have had that 20 years earlier. So it's better for him. But here's the thing. For many people who felt like that had become an intrusion, the fact that everybody is getting more closer to equal access feels like an intrusion, feels like something's been being taken away. And I think that then contributed to this further fraying. So when you think about what happened after the 50s, which is considered culturally kind of a golden era for those for whom it was good, and it was really good for a lot of people, the majority of people, and the vast majority of people, but there were people left out. But then you go into the 60s and you have a kind of innocence shattered when JFK is assassinated. And then in the 60s, you have the Vietnam War. I mean, you think about the Vietnam War and how that divided the nation. We had World War II, and not only did that not divide, that brought the nation together. We were on the right side. We were all in this together. Everybody was playing a role in this, whether you went overseas or not. You were doing things over here to support those who were. And then even right after that, people forget this. The Korean War is kind of the forgotten war, but because it's nestled right in between. But it's just a few years after the end of World War II, we get involved in another conflict. And lots of our, at that time, just men going over and fighting and dying. But for the most part, people accepted that as well. But the Vietnam War, just hordes of protests, and sometimes violent protests, and resulting in Kent State and 4 young people being killed by National Guardsmen on the campus of Kent State at a anti-war protest. So Vietnam, that contributed. Then during the 60s, you don't have Richie Cunningham and Fonzie and all those guys from Happy Days. This is now the hippie movement. This is now sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and the sexual revolution. You have the Voting Rights Act that's passed the next year. You have the Civil Rights Act in 1965. You have the riots or the uprisings. The white people normally almost universally refer to them as riots, and our African-American friends call them uprisings. But then in 68, in the midst of all of that, Martin Luther King is assassinated. You have school desegregation going on, which led to what you said, Larry, about you having some black friends in your class. But that's because of what had happened starting in the 50s into the 60s. Desegregation of schools was starting to happen. Mm-hmm. So things were not only changing, but as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of people were perceiving, at least, that something was being taken away. It wasn't just that things were changing. Something's being taken away. There were, as I recall, as I think back to the many episodes of Happy Days that I watched, I don't recall, I'm trying to think of any black people on it at all. And that would have probably been an accurate portrayal of what life was like for a group of young kids in Milwaukee, I think was the setting. And, going to high school in kind of a white suburb of Milwaukee, they would not have had any black friends. But it wasn't Happy Days for everybody. All of these eras that some of us might look back on and we say, and this is now, a political slogan for the last several years, make America great again. Mm-hmm. But what we forget is, it's easy for me to forget, that it wasn't as great for everybody. And so when you hear that, some people then are afraid because they're saying, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about going back to the Happy Days era? Are we talking about going back to the 50s? Now, thankfully, we've got these laws ensconced, thankfully, and all of that, so we'll never be back there. But we just all have to keep in mind that there were indeed happy days for lots and lots of people. There were, greater and less great days. America has been tremendously blessed, and we're tremendously blessed to be a part of it. And so it is a great country. But how great the experience has been is differed depending on who you were sometimes.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. As I think about this and the subject of a polarizing of our culture, I think that there are pockets of relief from this I can think of in my experience, more from more recent years. Some of our audience, the younger part of the audience, might not recall this, but in the early days of the 2000s, after the 9/11 attacks, we had, I think,
Mm,
some
yes, yes.
unification around
Hmm.
a common attack, a common enemy, and some feeling of
It's true.
national unity
It's true.
that came out of that, wanting to defend ourselves. And it didn't. As it always will, it didn't last, and there were polarization over how to eventually respond to that. But I think I saw some of that, and I remember some of that in things
Hmm.
like the Olympics, like you were talking about.
Mm.
I'd had a surgery. I forget which Olympics it was. What were the was it Carrie Strug stick in the landing? What year was that? Do you remember? I don't know if
I
you
don't remember
remember.
what year. No, but
uh, but I
but yeah,
remember.
she was a star. I know that. And are you thinking of '84 with uh now I'm gonna forget her
No, that's
name.
Mary Lou
So
Retton,
keep
right?
going.
You're
That's who
thinking
I
of
was
Mary Lou
thinking of.
Retton.
That's who I'm thinking
Yeah,
of, sticking the landing, right? But
yeah.
Shrug
That's
had
the
she had the sprain or broken ankle
yeah, yeah.
and stuck the yeah, that was tremendous. I don't know what year it was, but you're right. Yeah. Right.
So that, and I'm probably getting those things mingled, and I think that might have been pre 2001. But I remember pockets of
Hmm.
national pride around that.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. But yeah, I mean, there are plenty of things
Hmm.
for folks to get divided over. So let's talk about then. Are there more implications or more signals of this you want to talk about, or
So
do we
you're
want to
right.
talk
There
about?
still are some, and thankfully there are some areas like that. And the Olympics, the war in Afghanistan, pretty much everybody thought that to be justified because we'd been attacked the way we had. It was only about a year and a half after that, though, that we went into Iraq. In March of 2003, we go into Iraq. So about a year and a half after the 9/11 attacks. And that war divided us again,
Hmm.
over was that justified to go in? Remember weapons of mass destruction? Were they there? That was justified. And then we don't find any. And then the thing goes on for a very long time. So we did have it. Unfortunately, it was pretty short. It was kind of short lived. But one of the areas where some of these cultural changes have really come to the fore and brought everybody into the same space, and not always happily, has been through our schools. And that has had profound effects, and it's had profound reactions to it. So I just want to take a little bit to go through that to set the context in which we are ministering in a polarized culture. There was a day back in those happy days when the curriculum in our classrooms, our public school classrooms, was fairly uniform, and it was conservative. But 1954, you had the landmark decision, Brown versus Board of Education, and that overturned an 1896 Supreme Court decision, Plessy versus Ferguson, that had said that as long as you have equal facilities, they can be separate but equal. But
Hmm.
then this Brown decision said that separate but equal is inherently unequal. And so now you're going to share school facilities. Well, a few years later, 1962, you have another Supreme Court decision that removes school sponsored prayer
Hmm.
from the school day. Now, that's foreign to you. When you were in elementary school, you went to a public elementary school. I went
Hmm.
to a public elementary school as well in the 70s. And we didn't have prayer in the schools. I didn't know as a kid that there had ever been every day starting with prayer in the schools. But there are people, my in-laws, my parents are with the Lord now, but my in-laws, my wife's parents, are still alive. They can still remember when we had prayer in the schools. We have people in our church who can remember, as an elementary school student or even beyond, having school sponsored prayer. But that was done away. That was pronounced unconstitutional to have that in 1962. Next year, 63, You have a decision, Murray versus the Baltimore School Board. The Murray, as in the infamous Madeleine Murray O'Hare. Some of you know that name, but she was an atheist. She was just vile and very loud and obnoxious. And she went on TV a lot in the 70s and 80s. Some of you will remember that, Madeleine Murray O'Hare. And she was the one who brought that suit and went all the way up to the Supreme Court. She won it. It removed mandatory Bible reading. So there was a day for many decades in our public schools where you had prayer and Bible reading going on. And that went on, over many schools, over many, many years. But then in the 70s, the courts ruled that if you're going to do the desegregation that 1954 decision required, well, then you're going to have to start moving kids from one area of the city to another. That meant busing. That meant forced busing the kids. Well, that was met with just howls of protest by many. So as a result of that, it's no accident that the kind of school that you and I were able to attend in our high school years, a private Christian school, a relatively small private Christian school, was available for us to attend. It's because all this stuff was going on. Mm-hmm. It's no accident that the 70s and the 80s were the heyday of Christian schools. They sprung up all over the place. And in our area in Southeast Michigan here, you had a number of them spring up. And my mom did not want to send me to a racially charged high school. It was very tense, and she didn't want me to go there. And my father had passed away. She found this Christian school that I was privileged to attend from 8th grade through 12th grade. Turns out to be the same school. We didn't know each other because you're quite a bit younger, but it turns out to be the same school. And we were both blessed by that. But it came about, that school was started in 1966. The elementary was started. 1969, the high school was started. So it's all in that milieu. It's all within that environment that's happening. But it created a division in education, sometimes racially, because the truth is, I don't know about by the time you went to school in our Christian school, but for me, we had in my class, I think throughout the 5 years that I was there, I think we had one African-American student. Now it was a small school anyway. My graduating class was 48, I believe. But still only one. So, we were segregated again, but it was private education. And if not racially segregated, certainly we were culturally segregated. Is that kind of the way it went for you?
Yeah. And I was thinking about this as well. This is not what you expect to hear a pastor saying in a discussion on this subject, but in many ways, what you're describing, the process happening of the prayer being taken out of public schools, mandatory Bible reading being taken out of public schools, in many ways, that really was a necessity of a culture that was becoming more pluralistic. In other words, you had these things happening that are otherwise really good things. We like that. We want there to be public Bible reading and prayer. That's something we encourage in our congregation. It's why we're here. But we don't want to force that on people who are not Christians. It doesn't make sense to force non-Christians to pray. So as you have a culture then that is becoming more and more not Christian, people who are not Christians, that's a natural thing then to happen, and not necessarily bad. It sounds weird even rolling off my tongue, not necessarily a bad thing, but you don't want that superficiality and just imposed external conformity masking what the real issue is, right?
You hit on, that's an excellent point. And it also, I think, feeds into another reason why, though, there's a backlash, because this removal of mandatory prayer, because not everybody's a Christian, means the question naturally comes up, well, where are these non-Christians coming from? Where are we getting these people who are not exactly like us? And now you start to think about things like immigration and integration. And okay, so it's not Kansas anymore. It's not exactly like we had. This is changing. And in the minds of many, then it's not changing for the better, and it's being forced upon us.
Mm.
And you have people from the outside, in many respects, out from just maybe outside your community, from another community now being bussed into your school, or maybe people who were outside of your country, but now are coming in as well. And all of that can create this kind of fear that it's not just changing, but something is being taken away.
Mm-hmm.
Something that was very happy for me, something that was very good for me. It was great, and it's being taken away.
It's
Well,
interesting how that perspective, that evaluation seated in your perspective happens because
mhm,
we all love that about America, that it was a place that was founded on being able to come and worship freely without fear of persecution. But
mhm,
that's when it applies to me. But
right,
if somebody
right,
else has a different
mhm,
belief,
mhm,
for me to be able to retain that freedom for myself, I've got to recognize that for them. So
right,
in this project called America, that's one of the
yeah.
things that will necessarily happen eventually.
So here's one of the things that happens then. And I'd like to talk about this for a little bit that I think is little recognized. If I were to have, I said, it was in my blog, not on here, but a few weeks ago in my blog, I mentioned that, I had an initial desire after high school to maybe go to law school, go into law, maybe politics, that kind of stuff. The Lord called me, thankfully, to do what we're doing with the pastoring. But I thought if I ever did go into law, one of the areas I'd like to get into is this whole idea of separation of church and state. There are lots of good groups, thankfully, that are handling issues like that. But one of the areas that I think is underappreciated is this, that when in the name of separation of church and state, because pluralism means you don't want to, all the things you said, you don't want to force that on other people. So you remove Bible reading, you remove prayer. When you do that, one of the areas that I would like to see explored a bit more is it doesn't mean that you've necessarily removed religion.
Mm-hmm.
You've removed a particular type of religion. You've removed vestiges of things connected with a Bible, a holy book. You've removed that. But maybe you replace it with another secular book that takes the same place, holds the same value in the minds of those who revere it as your holy book. That you leave in place a de facto kind of religion. And in fact, I'm convinced that that actually has happened. That in removing the vestiges of religion, and I'm not saying that that shouldn't have happened. It's a hard thing. I of course would love to have Bible reading and prayer, but for the reasons you gave, we've got our leaders, our political leaders, have other things to consider, other people to consider who don't believe like we do. I get all that, as do you. But we need to be aware that in removing that stuff, you have not necessarily freed your schools from religion. And I think you could really argue that humanism is the de facto religion of our schools. And just a little bit of history on that. 1933, a document was produced. I'm going to let that go to voicemail, y'all.
This is
I'll let
not
it
the
go to
call-in
voicemail.
show.
We'll
This,
get
this is not the call-in show. We're gonna put that off till next week.
it. So 1933, I think it rings about 5 times. So we've already got 3 gone here. 1933, a document is produced called the Humanist Manifesto. The Humanist Manifesto. Now, a little bit later, after that, I think it was 1941, there was a group called the American Humanist Association. Still exists, still in some ways going strong. But 1933, there is this Humanist Manifesto, and it had 15 affirmations in it. It reads almost like a statement of faith, a statement of belief.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the first one. In fact, they call themselves religious humanists. And the very first affirmation says this: religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. So there you are. Okay. And
Yes.
you've got Humanist Manifestos 1 and 2, both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's part of
Nice.
my
Okay. Well,
worldview studies.
there you go. Okay. So I'll mention two, because there is a Humanist Manifesto too, but one was in 1933. Very first affirmation: religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. I mean, that's a statement of faith. Like, we would say in our church's statement of faith that we believe that God created the world in 6 24-hour days, but here they're saying that. Their second affirmation: humanism believes that man is a part of nature, and that he has emerged as a result of a continuous process. So he's evolved. That's a statement of their religious humanism. Third one, I'll just read two more. The third one, though: holding an organic view of life, humanists find that the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected. Now, what that's saying when it says dualism of mind and body, it's rejecting the idea of a spirit, of a spirit world at all. So we are mind and body, and mind has no non-material, immaterial component. It is all matter. It is all natural. And then their eighth affirmation, I just picked that one out because it says this: religious humanism considers the complete realization of human personality to be the end of man's life and seeks its development and fulfillment in the here and now. So, just like the Westminster Confession of Faith says in its very first question, the Westminster Catechism, what is the chief end of man? It is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, right? That's the answer given. I mean, this is, hey, we believe the end is the complete realization of human personality, and it's in the here and now. Now, that was signed in 1933 by 30 prominent Americans, including a guy named John Dewey. He's the inventor of the Dewey Decimal System. Some of you who are old enough to remember, before we had all digital catalogs for libraries and all of that you had the physical cataloging system, Dewey Decimal. It's that guy. And he is called the father of progressive education. But this was his belief system. And he had a great influence on the development of our public education system. So the founder of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, Roger Baldwin, was a humanist himself. He wrote articles for the Humanist magazine, which is the communication organ of that American Humanist Association. As you held up your book there, Pastor Larry, you had Humanist Manifesto 1 and 2. 2 was in 1973. And so they updated it a bit. But here's just an example of something it said. What do you have there?
I was just going to say seems a little more brazen, a little more dogmatic. They've got the different sections on religion and ethics, and they make statements like, no deity will save us, we must save ourselves. And they do, like you said, they name their objectives, self-actualization, and talk about where they get ethics from. Yeah.
Well, and that line has stuck with me for all these years, that no deity will save us. I brought that with me for today's recording, that we can discover no divine purpose or providence for the human species. While there is much that we do not know, humans are responsible for what we are or will become. No deity will save us. We must save ourselves. And then 30 years later, 2003, Humanist Manifesto 3 has been published as well. So that's still going on. So removing traditional vestiges, representations of more classical traditional religion does not mean you're religionless in your schools. So, and we believe that everybody has a worldview. Everybody has a set of lenses through which they view everything. So now that's created further separation, further division. That private school that I spent 5 years at, you spent some number of years at, that was really, in the 70s for me, the 80s for you, that was really the public school experience of a bygone day. But in order to get that, you had to separate from, develop a public school, pay additional money to go there, And so you find, I know you feel the same way. I'm very blessed to have been able to have gone there. But what it did mean, though, was it pulled me away. It pulled me away from guys that I went to elementary school. So, I was in neighborhood schools, and I had all these friends on my street, and I played sports with them, Little League, and played hockey with them and all of that. But my junior high, senior high years, that was all gone because so it created this chasm between us. It's just another and very important way that these divisions have happened within our society.
Yeah. A couple of things jump out at me in that discussion. One is initially, as we started talking about this, my mind immediately went to polarization inside the family of believers. And it's just because some of the things that have been going on recently. But you point out something very important, and that is that, our ministry isn't primarily just internally. We have a mission, and it involves the outside world. And so this is important stuff to recognize and to navigate through, both the balance between recognizing that nothing happens in a vacuum, and just because you remove Christianity doesn't mean you've removed religion. Balancing that with the fact that we can acknowledge the necessity of not forcing our belief on somebody else. It's something that someone has to believe voluntarily. We tell them what God says, and the Spirit of God works in their heart. Recognizing that, and yet recognizing that we can have discussions about and differences of opinion in the public square. We don't. It doesn't have to be. We have to win the culture war and force our way into public school for us to be willing to have the discussion and interact with other views and that kind of thing.
Well, the reason that I think that this walk through history is helpful, though, is because we do know the current moment. We do know that, as we introduced it, we're polarized. Hardly anybody would argue with that. And it comes into then the body of Christ. It comes into our churches. Listen, I just heard this week about a pastor in Minnesota who has been dismissed from his church. And he's been dismissed from his church, believe it or not, over mask mandates. So here's a church split over that. When it all started back in March, he told his church, look, I don't like it, but we're going to have to do what the government tells us to do with this. And he had an uprising of about half of the people in the church. And as a result, this man, a good man, I don't know him personally, some friends of mine do, by all accounts, a very good man. He's now looking for a church, probably going to have to move his family out of state to find where he's probably going to have another church that he's looking at. I mean, what a shame that kind of thing. All right. But what has contributed to making the current moment as polarized as it is? That's been going on for a while, is the point. And this feeling that something is being gradually taken away. And what is the reaction to that sense that something's being taken away? What I have seen, what I have read about in history and seeing now currently is anger. Anger is the response. That you've got a lot of people, including Christian people, good people, who have this low level, now sometimes high level anger about what's going on. Anger and fear are prime motivators for viewers, for listeners, for voters. Yeah. And if anger and fear get people to listen, if anger and fear get people to watch, if anger and fear get people out to march and to vote and protest and get them jazzed, if it works, and it does, then we should not be surprised that it's used a lot. And it's been now used and amplified in our day. As we've said in a couple of the episodes now, it's been amplified and it's been monetized, but it's been going on for a while, and it's kind of coming to a crescendo here now, I think. But what's underlying it? Anger. And you got people who are taking advantage of that anger.
Well, and that is such a dangerous thing, and it should be something that we are all on guard for, because as we hear those things, and as we hear the sentiment that's behind, the encouragement to be angry and stand up and fight for our rights, that kind of thing. There should be a distinction that we recognize between that and how God's word says to react in a progressively darkening culture where there is adversity and persecution. We're not told to grab your, beat your plows into weapons and
yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
It's actually the opposite of that we're to stand out as a light in this dark world. And
yeah. Thank you. No, that's excellent. Excellent. If we have a few minutes to try to wrap up along the lines of what you just said, then that, we've been heading toward this for a while. That's the case we're trying to make in a lot of areas. Then when people feel like they're being besieged, something taken away, even Christian people now are angry about that. And you've got people who then capitalize on that anger. One example, politically, you got to recognize that political operatives know what they're doing. They know how to advertise toward people in order to take advantage of what they know this sentiment is. 1988, George H.W. Bush runs against Michael Dukakis, one of the most infamous ads of all political history. It's called the Willie Horton ad. And it was about a black man who had raped and killed a white woman. And in Massachusetts, Dukakis had been the governor at the time that happened. And the guy who put that together, Lee Atwater was the campaign manager for George H.W. Bush. And he was a take no prisoners kind of guy. He took advantage of all these things. A couple years later, after Bush won that election pretty handily, Lee Atwater, at the age of 39, contracted inoperable brain cancer. And within a few years, he had died. Because now he was facing the end of his life, facing eternity, he had some real reflections. He gave an interview while he had the brain cancer, and he apologized to Michael Dukakis. He said this: in 1988, fighting Dukakis, I said that I would, quote, strip the bark off of that little, I'm not going to say the word, and then, quote, make Willie Horton his running mate. And that's what he did. He says, while I didn't invent negative politics, I'm one of its most ardent practitioners. Lee Atwater's mentor is a guy named Roger Stone. Roger Stone had his sentence commuted by our president, a sentence for 7 felony counts, including witness tampering and lying to investigators. Roger Stone's been doing this for decades and teaching other people how to do it. And so here we are. What do we do as Christians to minister in an environment? So very quickly, here's my recommendations, brothers and sisters. Diffuse that anger. Diffuse the anger. The Bible says this, James chapter 1 and verse 20, human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. If you find yourself angry, step back and say, okay, what's going on here? Am I angry for the gospel, or am I angry for something lesser? So that's one. And then I would say to do that means stay away from the angry voice. That understand that angry voice on the radio and TV is profiting from that. So do not take the bait, and hold this world with a loose grip. And that will temper your anger when you feel like this world is slipping and what you've known of this world. If you're not holding onto it with a tight grip, I fear that many of us are holding onto it with a tight grip. Remember, our goal is not preserve America. And when you realize that, then you can calm down. So that's first, diffuse that anger. Second, use forms of information that feed your mind rather than numb it. We've got lots of forms of information that come at us on the radio and on television. You can just turn those on, and you've got these voices just coming at you rapid fire, and they're just numbing.
Do I know, is the way to tell that they're numbing my mind if they're telling me that everybody else is a mind-numbed robot?
Yeah, I mean, that is, and they're yelling that to you, and they keep talking they and them, and these people. And, just the other day, now this is extreme, I understand, but just the other day, you had one of these guys say, one of the president's attorneys who was at this news conference with the other attorneys, with Rudy and all of them, Joe DeGenova, just said they ought to be taken out and shot. So Now he ended up he ended up explaining he was kidding. He said, although you could listen to it and see if he was if you think he was kidding. But it just gets to a point that people are so angry that you are concerned. I mean, what's going to happen this week in the next few days when the Supreme Court is, from everything I know about this, the Supreme Court is just going to say, hey, listen, this case that you're bringing to us, you just don't have a case, and that's that. What's going to happen when we have a transition of power here with people that are really jazzed? Let's pray about that. Let's pray that everything will go well. So yeah, Pastor Larry, you've got these voices. They're saying to you, that everybody else is a robot. Then maybe that's somebody you should avoid. Here's something I recommend. Do more reading than watching. Reading requires reflection. Really, it just requires reflection that television and radio don't. You just pick up stuff almost subliminally from television and from radio, whereas it has to be liminal. It has to be conscious when you're reading something.
Well,
you're going to say?
I was going to say, in it primarily the activity of reading allows you to focus more on what is being said than how it's being said. And,
exactly.
There's less of an opportunity to manipulate in the written word versus the spoken word or video.
That's right. If you want recommendations on things to read, if you think we could give recommendations that are helpful, be happy to do that. Here's a third thing. Hey, as Christians, we got to understand we cannot be devouring one another. The Bible says, Galatians 5:15, if you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. This is the word of God saying this to the churches in Galatia. This is a warning for us as well. Those conspiracy theories that so many of us are buying into, do you know what happens with those? Everybody becomes a suspect in the conspiracy theory. And so if you don't toe the line, then you're on the outside. You're looked at with suspicion. You see this happening right now. The governor, the very pro-Trump governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, has now been dismissed as part of the conspiracy because he didn't step in and say that the state legislature in Georgia needs to get together and overturn the results of the election. So Sidney Powell, attorney who's bringing all these bunch of lawsuits, said he's part of it. Brian Kemp is part of it. The Georgia Secretary of State, a Republican, voted for Trump both times. He's part of it. He's on the outside. You become a rhino. You keep hearing that term, a Republican in name only, if you don't toe the line. So that's the kind of things that happens.
You made me think of, and I just happened to find it as you were saying that. Michael Riley, friend of ours, says a lot of great things on Twitter recently. He said, hey, looks like it's time to retweet this one. Back in end of November, he said, it's going to be exciting to watch the always Trumpers swing from the Buddy Gaddis, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett to Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett are totally unqualified hacks.
Well, what's going to happen if this Supreme Court decision comes down the way, everybody expects? So in just the next couple of days, what will happen? That'll be interesting to see if they end up being, on the outside. So a couple other things as fast as I can here. Develop some humility. Humility is necessary in order for us to be able to agree to disagree, and disagreeing without imputing impure motives to your opponents. So understand, friends, that we have to ask the same questions. All of us do. I wrote a blog post on that several weeks ago about masks. Would Paul wear a mask? And at the end of that, I said, look, I don't know for sure what Paul would have done. I know the kinds of questions Paul would have asked. I know that for sure. I know what would have been his priorities. We must all ask the same kinds of questions, even if we don't arrive at the same answers. Filter all claims and responses and your responses through our mission. This moment right now that we're going through and all this tension and all of this polarization offers opportunity for us to demonstrate different values, that we are not of this world. We do not hold on to it with a tight grip, that our opponents are not our enemies. You can be my opponent without automatically being my enemy. We can show that we look forward to a future city whose builder and maker is God. The gospel unites those who otherwise would have been just fiercely estranged from one another. Ephesians 2:14, Christ has destroyed the dividing wall of hostility between Jews and Gentiles. Christ can do that between Jews and Gentiles. He can do that with anybody. Last thing is, we don't want to become known as anything other than Christians and a Bible teaching and Bible believing church. That's the moniker that we want to be known by. If somebody says, do you know those people at Community Bible Church in Trenton, Michigan? What you want to be able to hear is, yeah, those people follow Jesus. They believe the Bible, they teach it, and they try to live it as best they can. That's what you want to hear. We don't want to be the Republican church. We don't want to favor those who agree with us and then disfavor those who do not, even kind of making it an unspoken requirement. Somebody was joking this week that, with the masks and the vaccine stuff and all the controversy about that, you're going to have some churches having to put on their website, we're an MV church, masks and vaccines, or we're a non-MV church, so people know. I mean,
like
we're laughing,
Baptist or
somebody put a tweet out. I think it was a tweet and said, hey, remember how we used to laugh about churches dividing over the color of the carpet, and we would laugh at how stupid that is. And then they said, hey, we're doing it again. We're doing it again with the masks. We're doing it again with the vaccines. So thanks, Pastor Larry.
Well, thanks to everybody who's joined us for this episode. I think we're up just about out of time now. And Pastor Ken, thanks for the good history as always. Very thankful to have these conversations with you and learn from your interest in and perspective on history. And thank you all for tuning in and watching. And I hope this was profitable to you. And I guess last thing before we go is just to remind you all, if you don't already, to follow our Facebook page. And we generally post stuff like this there. You'll be alerted to it when you follow us there. And if you're watching this on our website or our YouTube channel, there should be a little button there for you to hit to subscribe so that every time we publish new content, you'll be aware of it. So thanks for joining us again this week, and we'll see you in the next episode. If you have a question you'd like us to consider, you can send that in to our email address, info@cbctrenton.com, or text it to us at 97000.